Hello, everyone, and welcome to this seminar. I am Beth Ginsberg, a research associate of the INNOVATE project, and thank you so much for coming. It is amazing to see how many people are interested in this project. Today, we are going to talk about what we are, and who you are, and we will have a panel and a Q&A session as well. First of all, just to give you some information about the INNOVATE project. The INNOVATE project provides new ways to build stronger engagement with migration research and policy. And we're going to work with many sectors, including the NGO sector, the CSO sector, government sectors, policymakers, academics, the private sector, and everyone and anyone else. So it's great that you're here today to hear about it and to spread the word. We are also going to, not only are we going to find stronger ways to communicate, but we're going to test those methods of communication throughout the project. This project is about new effective collaboration, as I said, and we plan to build this collaboration over the next 3 years. While this is happening, please follow or tag us on social media. And it was on the past slide, sorry. So follow us on LinkedIn, tag us on X and Facebook, and so on. So it could be the next slide now. Thank you. The collab is run by the INNOVATE Consortium, which is a Horizon-funded coordination project. We're a consortium of 12 partners, including the European University Institute, the University of Warsaw, ECRA, which is the European Council on Refugees and Exiles, University of Luxembourg, the University of Edinburgh, MPG or Migration Policy Group, also the University of Suleiman, the University of Technology of Kechémets, Roundbound University, and the IRC or the International Rescue Committee. Also, it includes the JRC, and that should be it. So there are 12 of us. So today, we have already talked about what we are and who we are, but now we would love to hear about you. And we would ask throughout this meeting, please communicate with us give us comments and suggestions through the Q&A. I spoke about collaboration, so we would like to hear from you. So please, on your phone, can you do a quick, we're going to do a quick poll. You will see on the left-hand side that there you can put your phone up to the QR code, or if you're using your computer, you can join Slido with the number, the identification number. So the first question we quickly wanted to ask you is, could you tell us what type of organization you work for? An academic institution, a think tank, an NGO or CSO, national government, local or city government, international or regional organization? I'll give you all a few seconds so you can. You can also scroll down to see local, city government, or other. I forgot to mention also the private sector, sorry. Okay, so it looks like all the percentages are in, from what I can see. So it looks like there is an excellent representation of academic institutions, also of international regional organizations. Can you scroll down just to look at the local? And so those are 2 areas, and a good representation of NGOs or CSOs. So we would love to have more think tanks, national governments, private sector, and local city government join. And that is what we're going to be doing during this project, is creating new links with these people. So thank you very, very much for answering the first question. That really allows us to know who is in the room. Thank you so much. So now we're going to do a second quick poll. And the question is, in your opinion, how much influence does migration research have on policy? So your first choice is no influence, low influence, some influence, high influence, or I don't know. Just waiting a couple minutes. Okay, great. So there's been a great mix of responses, and this demonstrates the timeliness and relevance of this new project, because it seems like many of you feel that there is some influence, and almost as many feel there is low influence. So that is very interesting. So you have some or low influence, and both of those are very timely and relevant answers. So thank you very much. So now I would like to pass the chair over to Andrew Geddes, the director of this project.
Many thanks, Beth. So I mean, that last poll kind of was very interesting, kind of showing us a sense, I suppose, perhaps of some skepticism amongst the audience about the influence of research on policy. So either some influence or quite low influence. And essentially, that's what this project is trying to address. I think that was probably the motivation for the core that led this project to eventually be selected and for us to come together as a consortium to address these issues. But it seems to us, and in a way that many of the people in the room will already know this, that the challenge is not necessarily the lack or absence of academic evidence, scientific research. Rather, one of the key challenges is how to ensure that the research evidence that is produced is more effectively utilized by those who can benefit from it. That could be governments, it could be civil society organizations, it could be a range of organizations that can benefit for closer links between research evidence, the policies and the practices they are engaging with. But what we have at the moment are a series of gaps, and I think the gaps that exist are important, and one of the metaphors that's frequently used is, well, bridging the gaps. And I think there's many projects that focus on bridging gaps, and it's easier to identify the gaps than it is to bridge them. But I think many people in this room might be familiar with some of these gaps. So we know there can be gaps between researchers and policymakers, geographically, but also temporally, because what researchers may be doing may not coincide with the agendas of policymakers. So there can be gaps, both physical and also in terms of the kind of timing of research and policy making. We know there can be lots of gaps also between research and the kind of practice of policy, because often evidence might be quite complex, might be difficult to disseminate or encapsulate in ways that can be turned into compelling messages for policymakers. And also the research evidence at times might be ambiguous, and also it might also be contradictory. Research evidence might point in different directions. That could be another challenge. What we also know, and I think this is really quite important, is there are gaps between policymakers, researchers, and the general public and citizens, because obviously both researchers and policymakers are very conscious of a wider public audience. And I think here there are issues around trust in science, trust in evidence, and particularly in an area like migration, which is highly politicized, whereas we know there is scope for significant polarization. And we also know there are gaps between levels of decision making. So we know that people here from local governments, from regional governments, from international organizations, from national governments. So this kind of distribution of authority can also be a challenge. So what we're interested in doing is thinking about the kind of terms of engagement and how they can be improved. We don't pretend we're going to come up with some miraculous solution, because we know it is clear that research evidence is one voice in a noisy room. There are many competing voices. The evidence base itself can be contested. And we also know that evidence, information, facts will be shaped by people's pre-existing frames and their beliefs and their values. And we have to take that seriously in any project that tries to establish effective links between evidence and policy. So the challenges are serious, and many people attending this meeting today will be fully aware of the challenges, and hopefully you'll be able to share with us your experiences. And what I wanted to do now is hand over to my colleague, Dr. Eleonora Milazzo, who's going to run us through some of the work we've been doing so far with the project and some of our kind of immediate plans, so you can see what we're doing. Over to you, Eleonora.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eleonora Milazzo. I'm a research fellow at the Migration Policy Center, and I'm now going to walk you through the Migration Research to Policy collab. So through the collab, we connect policymakers, government officials, researchers, academics, and practitioners to ensure that evidence is useful, practical, and applicable for today's migration challenges. So what is it that you can find in the collab? First of all, the research exchange, the engagement hub, and training resources. The research exchange is a collaborative database of policy-relevant migration research presented in a policy-friendly way. So explore the database, filtering results by category, theme, or geographical location. Or as you can see, you can simply write a keyword in the search bar. And this way you will discover a project's findings in brief, their implications for migration policy and practice, and a selection of concise and policy-relevant publications and tools. So the research exchange is at the core of our project. The goal of INNOVATE, as you heard, is to build stronger engagement around research evidence. And the research exchange is our attempt to do this. So we launch it now at the beginning of the project to show what INNOVATE and the collab are doing, and most importantly, to provide clear ways to interact with us. But obviously, this is the start of the process. So in this first phase, the research exchange will feature all migration research projects funded by Horizon Europe. But with your contribution, we are going to expand it. You are invited to recommend research projects with significant stakeholder engagement, funding, and proof of impactful results for inclusion in the research exchange. And obviously, effective research to policy communication is key for us, so we will work over time to refine the collab resources, including the research projects entries, and this is how you can suggest edits, but also the structure and the messaging around this platform to really adjust it to what works best for users of research and researchers. In the collab, you will also find the engagement hub that will feature engagement tips and tools, including our engagement shorts, and training resources, including our upcoming training on research policy collaboration, which will take place in March and will be free. Obviously, though, we cannot collaborate without you, so we invite you to visit the collab website to learn how you can get involved. You can explore, of course, the research exchange, share your tips on research policy collaboration. If you are a researcher or an academic, you can also request edits to your project's page or add content to existing entries in the research exchange. You can submit your research for inclusion or explore our engagement in innovation pilots. And obviously, make sure you are signed up to our mailing list to receive updates on events and our Research in Short digest, which will launch soon. So I'll stop sharing my screen now. Thank you all for listening. And I'm now very pleased to introduce our roundtable participants who are going to share their insights on how to build more effective engagement and communication around research findings. First of all, I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for this afternoon, Veronika Bilger, who is head of the research unit at the International Center for Migration Policy Development, ICMPD, and also a partner in the INNOVATE project. Veronika has coordinated and worked in various EU and national funded projects. She has been a lecturer at the University of Vienna for many years and has provided expert trainings to other relevant professionals. So thank you for joining us this afternoon and moderating this session. So next we have Catherine Woollard. Welcome, Catherine. Catherine is director of ECRE, an alliance of 127 NGOs in 40 European countries and also partner in the INNOVATE project. ECRE defends the rights of the displaced people in Europe and in European foreign policies using litigation, advocacy, and communications work. Catherine has held this position since 2016 and is also adjunct professor of law at the Free University of Brussels. So thank you very much, Catherine, for being with us today. Let me then welcome Sabina Sirokovska, Policy Coordinator in the European Commission, DG Home, Unit A1 for Policy Coordination and Interinstitutional Relations, in charge of inter alia coordinating migration research for DG Home. Thank you, Sabina. It is a pleasure to have you here. And last but not least, Daniela Vono. A very warm welcome to you too, Daniela. Daniela Vono is a Deputy Executive Secretary of Population Europe, a network of 41 demographic research institutes hosted by the Max Planck Institute for Demographic Research in Berlin. Population Europe fosters collaboration among scholars, policymakers, and experts from various sectors to address demographic change at multiple levels. So welcome to you all. I will now hand it over to Veronika for the roundtable discussion and the Q&A. So please stay with us and thank you. Over to you, Veronika.
Thank you, Eleonora. So welcome from my side as well to all participants and the panelists. It's wonderful to see such great interest to discuss how we can improve engagement, collaboration, and communication to ensure that research findings reach and also resonate with both specialists and the wider audience. So we will roughly have half an hour with our distinguished panelists now, and we'll then have a question and answer session. For the audience, please use the chat function for posting your questions to the panelists. To start the discussion, for good reasons, policymakers, practitioners, and researchers operate under different logics, which can, however, as Andrew highlighted earlier, challenge collaboration and communication. Therefore, we will now explore ways to create more effective engagement. And I'm excited to hear what our panelists will share based on their rich experiences. And I would like to start with you, Catherine. You have been at the forefront of advocacy and policy work for many years. You network, you use, and you produce research to advocate and influence policy at the highest levels. So from your experience, how can engagement be successful in ensuring that research informs practice and policy? Or what practical advice would you give us?
Great. Thank you very much, Veronika. I'm just going to run through 5 points that in a summary form. First, I think it depends who you are and what is your source of legitimacy and authority as a researcher. So that may be academic excellence, it may be contact with communities, lived experience, geographic scope, neutrality, and so on. For ECRE, we derive that legitimacy, such as it is, from our knowledge of EU matters, from EU law, international law, our geographic scope, and our contact with practitioners. We also declare the fact that we're not neutral. That leads also to the fact that our research, and I think often successful influencing research, actually has a lot of detail. It's not simplified. And that's also because there are a lot of policymakers, particularly at working level, who want the details. And so drawing on expertise, and it may be counterintuitive because sometimes we're told that we should be simplifying, too long, too detailed. No, in our view, no, that is all has a significant influence. Second point, despite the length and the detail, always have a summary. But I believe the summaries are more useful when they focus on research findings, rather than trying to concoct policy recommendations. And policy recommendations are so often so badly done. They're not actionable. They have no influence on policymakers, whereas research summary of findings, this is useful empirical evidence, means somebody doesn't need to read the detail if they don't have the time. Technical level, maybe reading the detail, higher level not, but you've got the summary there in case. I think in terms of a discussion of policy recommendations, so-called solutions, although we try and avoid the use of solutions as a term. But that level of discussion, I think, takes place in different fora where you have a variety of sources of evidence. So that's one of the interesting things about the INNOVATE project for us, is that collating different sources of evidence, actually building policy recommendations on one piece of research doesn't work. So summarize, maybe have recommendations for practice, recommendations for law, and research findings. Third point, work at the level of indirect influence. Policymakers not particularly receptive to evidence, as the survey showed, but get your evidence, your research in the hands of and the decisions of courts, of international organizations, and in a completely separate way of the media, and then be coming towards policymakers indirectly. Fourth point, I think using research at different levels can be useful. So combining, for instance, empirical evidence of facts on the ground with research on legal and administrative considerations all at once. To give you an example of this, there is a debate in some member states on returning people to Syria, for instance. In order to influence that debate, you may be bringing research about empirical facts of the situation on the ground, but just as likely to be influential is research on the legal questions, the likely impact on administrative considerations, institutional considerations of a state trying to do that action of returning people to Syria. So multiple levels to influence in different ways. Fifth and finally, I think building the trust such that you're not just communicating in written form is extremely useful. So if you've got the trust and established the authority that you are invited to communicate directly face to face, or that you're invited and commissioned to feed your research into institutional processes, this may be more influential than communicating always through your own written products. And I'll conclude with just one thought for our discussion. As again, the survey showed, I think this is an area of policy which is particularly immune to evidence. And what we need there is actually better research on all of the other factors that influence policymakers and squeeze out research and evidence. So that may be myths, misinformation, path dependency, populist methods, instinct, prejudice, hubris, and identifying and countering those with specific research. I think it is another level of looking at this. We try this sometimes, for instance, identifying a particular myth that is constantly repeated by policymakers and targeting that very directly with counter-acting research. There, thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, for your insights. I think very important. Your guidance will be very helpful. You're part of the consortium also for further developing our collab. So the question of legitimacy, formats, find the right allies, and also the question what to focus on. So that will certainly something we will be further discussing in the collab as well. Now I would like to turn to you, Sabina. At the European Commission, you are in a position where you gain perspective at two critical moments for research. At the beginning, understanding the policy needs, and later when findings have the potential to inform policy. So from your perspective, what approaches work to making research impactful, and what challenges, on the other hand, have you encountered, or what should be avoided? What should we avoid and improve?
Thank you very much, Veronika, and thank you very much for your invitation to this very interesting collab webinar. In preparing for today's debate, I tried to think about the basic recommendations I would give from my point of view. And I stress it's really the point of view of somebody who works for the European Commission, who is not the only policymaker in town. So I would really encourage everybody to also focus on other key players at the, of course, national level, local, but also European level. We also have the European Parliament and the member states, and their role should not be underestimated, especially in an area so highly polarized as Andrew said, as migration, and so as a result, migration research. So perhaps I could give you a few, from my point of view, the most important recommendations of how to engage with policymakers. For me, number one is definitely the timing. Timing, especially in research in general, but I think especially in migration research is everything. To get the ear of policymakers, it is crucial to have research relevant for what is going on, what they have on their desks, what they're negotiating, or what they will be shortly negotiating. So it's important to look for a good kind of policy window. Admittedly, this is not easy in migration policy, but I would say now with the new commission and the new mandate is a very good opportunity to look at what is in the mission letter, for example, for the Home Affairs Commissioner, because that will give you some indications of where policymaking at the commission level, at least, will be going in the next 5 years. So indeed, the more topical your research is, the better. And then that brings me to my second recommendation, would be to really tailor your message to the policymakers' needs. Don't give general description of everything you have ever done, although it may be very interesting. But in my experience, there might be kind of information overload, at least at the start. So I know that Catherine said that simplifying too much is a myth, but I would say in the first contact, not necessarily. In the very first contact, it is really to catch somebody's attention. It is really important to be very brief, bring a one-pager with an executive summary, really the key findings. And indeed, recommendations are tricky, policy recommendations, especially in this policy area. I would say if you really want to put them in, indeed make them actionable. There was nothing worse to see than, maybe a very good piece of research done on the pact, the conclusion of which was the pact has gone all wrong. Please go back to square one. You cannot adopt the pact. And this reached the policymakers at the moment where they were just about to strike a deal to actually adopt the pact. This is a kind of a very unfortunate example of timing that, it just won't work. You cannot do this kind of recommendation. Then I would say don't hesitate and engage very early with policymakers. The earlier you do it, the higher the chances is that what you'll be doing will be relevant for them. So don't be shy to reach out to, policy coordinators like me or whoever you have contacts with. For which it is really important also to team up. This is something that was also mentioned by Catherine, because if you combine your efforts with other researchers or in a network or with a think tank, then you can combine your policy recommendations, for example, or your findings together as a package, and that will have a much higher impact than just one single research. I also agree with what Catherine said about trying to present the research results on multiple layers. So, for example, including the legal level or the administrative, so that policymakers see the overall impact of, okay, if we go for this evidence-based approach proposed by these researchers, what impact will it have on the budget, on the decision-making, on everything? Don't stay focused only in the, let's say, the primary level, the primary focus of research. That is very useful. you may also think, maybe related to what I said in the beginning, what to do if you just happen to work on something that does not fit nicely into any policy window. For this, I think precisely the INNOVATE project and the research exchange is the excellent place to store your results, and then you can bring it up later when there is a better moment to get more impact with policymakers. So I think that's it. Happy to answer any questions. Voila.
Thank you, Sabina. There was very clear points and also very crucial for our way forward. I think the timing and research oriented to the specific needs of policymakers are key to whether the research will be effectively used. So that's what I heard, and it's about delivering research in a way that it responds to the practical and sometimes urgent or demands of the policy world, also to team up and find the right audiences or spread it in different audiences. Thank you. Let me now turn to you, Daniela, and the Population Europe's Policy Lab has become an important platform for fostering exchange among policymakers, the private sector, civil society, and academia with regard to demographic developments more specifically, but based on this, on your insights and experience with the Policy Lab. So what are good ways to build effective engagement? What concrete guidance from that experience would you suggest?
Thank you and good afternoon. Thank you so much for this invitation and congratulations on the project. It's super exciting. I'm so glad to be here with you. Let me first explain quickly where I come from, because it's easier to follow my thoughts. So Population Europe is a network of demographic institute, being migration one of the three components of demographic change together with fertility and mortality. We are a network started with 13 partners and now it's 41. And these institutes are here in a voluntary basis. Nobody's paying anything to be part of this network, but the community believed since 2009 that it's important to join forces, to have a voice in what Andrew rightly said, in a very noisy room, where different stakeholders are trying to contribute to policymaking, but also to civil society, to international organizations, from technical to more high-level discussions. So this is where I come from. And I would also like to make a note that in this world where I work, we need to be very humble. And because we are always learning and we are always trying different things, there's no formula. You ask me, how can I build an effective engagement? We can talk for days about it, and I can tell you so many things we have tried along the way. But I have my preference. I have things that worked well, and this is what I want to talk to you. So the first thing is that take time at the beginning. We mostly create strategies inside projects, and we get together as partners, dissemination communication partner in consortium. Mostly we form the consortium as Population Europe. We see the call, we look at who are among the community we have, but also outside of our community, working seriously, rightly, and which leadership you have in each institute or in each unit in universities. You need to really think about colleagues that are in your consortium, their availability, because engagement needs timing, as Sabina rightly said. If there's something coming up on the news tomorrow and people ask about it, we need to reply. And if scholars don't look at their mail every day and don't reply in hours, I will contact someone else in my network. So timing is very important. The other thing is that you should decide from the beginning which kind of engagement you want to have, because the engagement is a very huge word. You can get people coming back to your events. This is a proof of engagement. You can have more collaborations with specific stakeholders. You can have changing research policy agendas, which is almost impossible, to be honest, but a list of engagement possibilities that you can have, and you need to be clear about your ambition, because your strategy will depend on that. And the other thing is the intensity, because as a consortium, you won't be able, like, if you don't have a partner that is, and here's another element that I think it's very important to say very boldly, because I work with many horizontal sister projects where dissemination and impact is a side job of researchers in the project, or where they hire a company for mostly for communication to have great design for things, social media. They sell a package, and it's very difficult to work on this base. Really need to have someone really working full time on the engagement, dissemination, communication, at least one person. Basically, the other thing that I wanted to say, just to conclude, is that partnering with relevant organizations. Here in this project, you have non-academic partners, is very important, because when you enter the world of engagement, you need to build your network, and this is an endless work. It starts when you start, and it will never end. And there are other stakeholders that are specifically working on a subtopic, or like, you find all sorts of amazing people on this way, and you need to build partnership to strengthen your voice outside academy. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. So what I take, the important takeaways that will also be relevant for our approach in the CoLab, and that what was mentioned before also is really this building relationships and building partnerships in all directions, so to say, and then really invest in engagement strategies. That's not something that can be done aside, and that can make or will make such a difference. And then also the timing, then for the research logic to be ready to answer pressing questions when they come to the table. So thank you very much. I would like to remind the audience, please, to use the chat function. It's open already, so you can post your questions. And let's move into the second round immediately now and focus on your experience with dissemination and communication more specifically. And this round, I would like to start with you, Sabina. From your experience, what are good ways to ensure effective communication and dissemination of research findings, more specifically also to the policy world?
Okay, thank you very much, Veronika. Perhaps just to very quickly go back, because there was one thing I forgot. I really liked your Slido in the beginning when you asked about the estimate of influence that migration research has. And I thought I would have also voted for some influence. And I think some influence is actually very good. I think that especially if kind of influence is defined as achieving a change in policy, that's a bar pitched very, very high in migration policy, given the nature of the topic. So I think aiming for some influence is a very good start. But to your question on dissemination, it of course is related to what we discussed before. So for me, the first line message should indeed be simple, relevant, brief, to the point. Then the second line message, of course, once you got the engagement going, then you can, of course, and you will have to go into more detail to substantiate your claims, to enter into dialogue with the policymakers. So there, of course, some more details are of relevance compared to communication with a wide public, I think, where usually you stay at the first level very often. So for me, Personally, in my experience, I think that communicating research results in policy briefs is not a bad way at all. It's a good start to disseminate. This is a kind of first to go place if you want to find out, again, if possible, in a very succinct way, what the research is about. And once it ticks a box of, okay, this is something I need for the policymaker, this is relevant, he or she can dig deeper. Having said that, of course, that's not the only way. I think that you should keep multiple communication channels open. So engage in a more interactive way. Also, I think like webinars, seminars, workshops, it's still a very, very good method, especially now that, you don't have to meet every time in person, but you have also the virtual mode that kind of simplifies things and makes them also maybe more accessible. I think in that regard, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have already some good ways of disseminating results. Also, back to the form, what my colleagues especially appreciate, and I think also, for example, our current commissioner really likes information in a visual format. So don't be afraid when you communicate your results to use various graphs, data visualization tools, or even interactive dashboards, where maybe you can enter some data and see what the result is. This is something very useful because that gives the policymaker a possibility to try to manipulate the data themselves to see how relevant it is for them. So yeah, and otherwise, again, dissemination in a teamed up approach would be more impactful, in my opinion. So try to combine into some kind of clusters your results that you bring over as a package, which will firstly mean that you will represent not only your own research but several, but also I think your findings will have a much bigger weight. And I think that's perhaps it. And back to the timing also of the dissemination is crucial. So the ideal situation is to get your results out at a moment to somebody who actually is working on something related to your research at the moment when he or she is working on that research. That's a super ideal situation where, of course, you will have the biggest, your research will have the biggest impact. But I appreciate that it's not always possible to do that.
Thank you, Sabina. So again, very clear message to which can inspire our approach to communicate more effectively, to take the step-by-step approach, start with clear and crisp kind of insight into the findings, and then substantiate later on with the details, which are so important as well, as Catherine said, and then use the appropriate and various dissemination or communication tools and formats and so on, and the question of language, and again, get together, find cluster, team up, and come in not like as the lonely finder of new research, but get your alliances again. Yeah. Thank you. Turning to you again, Daniela, and taking the question up from your angle. So you were recently awarded the 2024 Outreach Award for Communication in Population Science, and for your exceptional work in communicating complex demographic research exactly at the science policy interface. So what do you see as the best ways to ensure effective dissemination to more specialist audiences and communication to the wider audience, including the general public?
Thank you. Well, from my, can you hear me? I think I pressed something. Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
It's fine.
Okay. I think I think my participation here today will be focused on the beginning. Like for me, everything that happens in the beginning is extremely important to determine everything that's going to happen afterwards. And one thing that I think it's very efficient is when you start a new project, you have a closed door stakeholder meeting with key people you would like you consider relevant for your project. you present your main ideas, or you focus on a specific topic. It doesn't to be research results. You choose a topic that you would like to discuss with this small group of people that are relevant for you, and listen to them. Listening to what people need, to what from civil society, from international organizations, exactly in line with what Sabina said. Like, it's very important to know how you as a scholar can be useful for the non-academic community, because this is very tricky. Like, yes, 2 days ago, I was with a group of colleagues working at the municipal level, and there was a question like, do you read papers? Like, do you go to research? And she said, obviously, I don't have time for that. But the reflection that she had afterwards, like, even if I would have the time, what would be the reason to do that? She was not certain about the utility of having contact with scholars. And this is something that concerns me enormously. And I think we should always go back to this initial point, like, how can I be relevant for you at different levels? So this is one thing that I find important. The other one is that you always have this co-creation element. So people have a voice. You're not here just to listen passively to a wise scholar. You are here to share as well. And many times in the projects I have worked, research agendas changed thanks to the feedback that scholars receive. So be open to that as well. And this works very well to create trust and respect with non-scientific stakeholders. And the other thing about communication, my message here is that we started with Twitter in 2014. And before that, we just had a website and an email list. The data protection with building up mailing lists also changed a lot over the years. Before, we used to go to a meeting, get the participants list and enter them to an Excel file. Now you need all sorts of authorization to get people voluntarily also registering to your mailing list. So it's important to me that emails are there, like your mailing list and your strategy to grow your mailing list is very important, because with social media, it goes on ups and downs. And I've always, like, every time we send an invitation, we are sending at different days. We have a strategy to send first emails, and then Twitter, then LinkedIn, and then you see the impact, then partners, collaborations, and you see the impact of each of them separately, and nothing beats emails. So I would say we innovate in the communication, visuals, everything, but the good old mailing list is still very important. And thank you.
Thank you, Daniela, for sharing your strategies. So what I got to consider is to really invest in relations beyond the academic community from the very beginning. Find the space and the possibility where we can contribute together, where interests meet and everyone has its own piece to give to it. So the societal relevance, and then in terms of communication, really establish a kind of communication chain, so to say, and don't neglect the traditional ways of communication. Thank you. And before opening the question and answer session, I would like to raise a final important question for Catherine. So in your work with ECRE as a knowledge broker, if I can say so, how would you define or measure success in terms of effective dissemination and communication of research findings?
Thank you. And I like the question's separation between dissemination and communication, which I think are or should be measured separately. In terms of dissemination to specialized audiences, and for us, those are policymakers, practitioners, legal practitioners, courts, media. The way we would measure our success, and some of those are quite general points, but I'll just run through a few. One would be citations, simply. So, for instance, if we're getting somewhere around 10,000 citations a year with the AIDA database, this is a sign that that research in that database is being used because it's being formally cited. I would say direct incorporation of our proposals and our proposed language into formal documents and processes. So on that, I would say we've had much more success with something like proposing amendments to legal texts, where hundreds and hundreds of amendments using language that we proposed have been incorporated, but practically no success with something like policy recommendations and proposals that are just not incorporated very much in any meaningful sense. I would say use of our arguments, our language, our ideas without citation, what some might call sometimes plagiarism, but we see sometimes things that we put forward, be it a framing of an issue, be it an idea directly that is absorbed. Others may also be proposing the same thing, but sometimes not, and that we take as a sign of success. Invitations to hearings, to events, to deliver training, all of that, to provide more research, all of that we take as a big sign, and then things like feedback. In terms of communications, I think it's something very, very different. For us as a very small outfit based in Brussels, we tend to judge the results of our communications work simply in terms of outreach, in terms of how many people receive what we're putting out. We don't have the capacity to go beyond that and then see what action follows or what impact that communication actually has. So we judge based on how many people read our weekly bulletin. We have 15,000 subscribers there, so we take that as a sign that they have chosen to subscribe. Social media numbers, media requests. So we might get 100, 150 requests from the media every year. We take that as a sign they've read what we're putting out in the communication world. Just reach. I mean, for instance, our campaign on the European Parliament elections reached 3 million people. Our message was vote. We don't actually know if those people voted because we don't have the capacity to measure that, but we're assuming that having reached them, then some of them voted. And just as a final thought on this, in terms of what is effective, on the NGO side, I'm not sure that numbers necessarily make much difference. I mean, and I know I shouldn't say that because we're all committed to collective work, but you have a statement signed by 100 NGOs. I mean, so little of that, I'm afraid, has an impact. What does have an impact is where you're responding to a question that is on the agenda of policymakers. So there has to be some intersection with what policymakers are actually examining. And that creates a challenge for us because some of the questions on their agenda are not questions that we want to answer. The primary question is, how do you stop refugees arriving in Europe? And so that's not an answer that we're mobilizing our research to respond to. However, there might be an intersection on something like, how do we make asylum systems function better in Europe, where there would be a sort of intersection between what we're selling in terms of research and what is on the agenda of policymakers. Other things that we have research on, like how do you use external action to tackle the causes of displacement, I think is a question that's just not being asked really. So the research also has to fit, it has an impact based on what is on the agenda. Beyond that, you may be able to, at some level, to change the policy agenda as well. But I think that's a separate question.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for your insights. I think the question of success is particularly complex and poses a challenge for many in the room, actually. And to still be able to sell on the intersections where you still find common territories to contribute to and to sell. Now that we have heard from our panelists, I would like to now open the question and answer session, and I see there is questions already. There is one I often hear from policymakers that academic evidence is relevant and many are interested, but then regularly evidence gets discarded during decision-making process as other logics take over. What are your thoughts on this? I think, Catherine, that comes in your direction.
Yes, I think I would respond by elaborating a little bit on the conclusion I made in the first round, that we need to be identifying what are those other forces that have an impact. Some might argue it's all politics. Something like pressures within political parties is one issue. We can't talk about public opinion generally. We need to talk about the public as perceived by political parties and their political strategies, because I think very often for policymakers, in the sense of politicians, those are the factors that override evidence at every point. Related to that, and we see unfortunately also on the technocratic institutional side, are the perpetuation of certain myths, misinformation, manipulation. I think there's also a big question of path dependency in asylum decision-making, for instance. I mean, that something is continuing along a path and it's very hard for evidence or anything else to intervene and change that. There's also psychological questions, and there I think there's research that's going to be done in the INNOVATE project that will be very interesting. Maybe somebody else wants to refer to that, of questions that what actually influences somebody. And we see very often questions of instinct, certainly of prejudice, sometimes of hubris. These psychological factors override evidence. And I think because the issue is about people, everybody assumes that they understand much more than they do. That's particular to this this area. My view is that we need to dig down into all of those factors and tackle them directly and in also in an evidence-based way, and try to sort of either cut off, influence, shape those other or neutralize those other factors to some extent. I mean, that's of course a huge and probably impossible task, but it cannot just be that we continue to say evidence is not having an impact. Less so than in other policy areas is evidence relevant. We have to unpick and directly address those other factors, of which I listed a few.
Thank you, Catherine. I have several questions here. Question to Sabina, and please be reminded to give brief answers. We have a couple of questions still open, and this is in line with on the topic, what you say, find the right questions at the right moment. So in this specific moment, which research questions do you see as very appealing for policymakers, to Sabina?
Yes, I think I partially replied already in the first round when I mentioned the mission letter. So if you look at the mission letter from the Commission President to the Commissioner Designate for Home Affairs, this is actually a document we look at also in DG Home. We don't have anything else but that. And there you will already find some ideas of where the focus will be in the coming years. If we like it or not, there will be a lot of focus on fighting irregular migration. There will be the link between migration and security, stressing the protection of borders, stressing returns, readmission, cooperation with third countries. Those are the areas that will be, I think, on the radar. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list. There will be also others. But I think this is where the future policy debates are going. Of course, we are still committed in the Commission to help member states implement the pact that they finally agreed to. So we will, of course, continue with this. You know that actually everything should be put in place within 2 years after adoption. So we have until 2026. So also a good guidance perhaps would be to look at what is in the pact, because that will have to be implemented by member states, and some parts of the pact might be maybe good avenues for research work as well.
Thanks. There is yeah, I hope I can summarize for Daniela. Compared to fields like trade, finance, and other areas, how can we come up with a unique migration voice and methods of news feeding and interaction, and also how can we include migrants themselves participating in shaping research and policy decisions?
Well, it's a big question, but let me start with the incorporating migrants in shaping research. I think this kind of closed door meetings where we invite, or even a webinar with selective, you cannot aim at many people to change agendas unless you do a kind of a citizen panel, and this is another methodology, but dialogue is the key to include many voices. So you have to do your research, whom you want to listen to, and invite them, and have the setup where people can also speak. I think it's important. And just to complement, I saw the question about the International Migration Review paper published last week that I read with great curiosity. And I think it's a bit unfair with the impact that research has had, and I myself have been involved in different migration projects where they had many different disciplines from different like economists, so qualitative sociologists, demographers, and we became a family. Quantmic project is a beautiful project where you can really see that these fields of specializations, they can interact, be positive, and have substantial impact. So I think it was a bit unfair, to be honest. Thank you.
Thank you. I take up 2 more questions here on in how much does, in your opinion, maybe Catherine and Sabina, does social media matter to reach policymakers? In what way is this a good channel, an underestimated channel to communicate?
I would say
Sabina.
towards European Commission policymakers, I would not consider it the best channel, to be honest. it's more like that we also monitoring the social channels, the social media, and often finding various myths would need, and this has been also mentioned before, a very quick support of researchers to debunk these myths. So it's social media for us is something where we rather, you know, monitor what's going on. We follow the situation, the public opinion, and try to react, or even better is would be to pre-bunk rather than only debunk. And there, of course, evidence is crucial. The problem, and sorry, I know I'm turning the question a little bit around, but the problem is that this is needed very quickly, because, you know, in social media, what you do in 2 hours is often too late, but research takes time. But again, maybe the INNOVATE project would work because could help, because the research may already be out there. It's not a question of having to do the research, but finding it, identifying it, the right piece of research to use in this kind of media dialogue on social media with the public. And so that would be my take on social media. But to reach policymakers in the Commission, I think a good old email would be definitely a better way than a post on X.
Mm-hmm. As Daniela also
highlight.
Mm-hmm.
If I may jump in there, I mean, I think it goes back to the distinction that we had in the question about dissemination versus communications. I think in terms of dissemination to specialist audiences, social media is of limited value. In terms of communicating with a wider audience, yes, so we would use it, for instance, to mobilize allies, in something like a campaign to get people to vote, to inform wider civil society, other related organizations of what's going on. I think we've, for what the content that we produce, which is more opinion based, that social media has been useful over the years, and we've had big numbers on X that we're also reflecting on whether or not to abandon now, and the debate has switched to LinkedIn. But there, for instance, where you're engaging in a debate based on opinion, polemic, which is part of our work. It's not part of the discussion that we're having on research, where we at least try to have a bit more objective, neutral research. That all of that works well on social media. If I may also jump in the question of involving people with direct experience of the issue, from our side, we employ people who have direct experience of displacement, but we try to be strict about the fact that they are employed at ECRE as experts, like any other experts that we employ, but based on the knowledge and skills that they have. And the question of ensuring that there are those voices in the policy debate, but that it is not done in a manipulative and infantilizing way, where people with lived experience are presented to tell a story, and then there's a discussion about research and evidence afterwards, is something that we absolutely strive to avoid. There are, I think, different schools of thought in communications on some of that.
Thank you, Catherine. And I have a methodological question, Daniela. I think to you, from a participant who works with qualitative research and ethnography. So the question is, what is the value of results of smaller scale project compared to large scale survey and data driven and larger data driven project in terms of relevance to policymaker, as opposed to the qualitative smaller samples and experiences, as opposed to the big data driven surveys or whatever projects?
Well, I'm from the opinion that everything has its value. You just have to find who is interested in that. And on the one hand, and the other one, you need to make an effort to make whatever you're doing relevant. And in the case of qualitative migration research, is extremely relevant and important. In this project that I mentioned to you, QuantMig, we had one partner was PRIO, the institute in Norway, and they are doing outstanding qualitative research. And they are showing, for example, the traditional root cause of migration. It's something that, and its impact on the probability of leaving a country is something to be questioned. They are showing the importance of like the relative importance of climate change in migration is really the changes that we are observing, forcing people out here to Europe, or are they staying in neighboring countries? These are all qualitative research they have conducted in the project, and that were extremely relevant for the project, and we found lots of interested audience for that, and really influenced.
Thank you, Daniela. I think we approached the end of this discussion, looking at the time. So we have heard extremely important points, experiences, and gotten advice on building effective engagement and effective communication. And I hope this has inspired ways in which we all can contribute to bridging the gaps which Andrew highlighted. So thank you again to our wonderful panelists for your time and expertise, and to everyone in the room for your participation, your questions. And with this, I pass it over to Andrew, who will now share with you how we can move forward together in the INNOVATE project. So Andrew, back to you, and thank you all in the room.
Thank you, Veronika. Thank you also to the panelists. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
So I know we thank everybody who's stayed with us until now. I think the roundtable was really fascinating, and we'll make that available on our YouTube channel of the Migration Policy Centre and through the INNOVATE project, so people can see what has been presented this afternoon. What I want to do is very quickly just go through some of the ways that you can get involved with the project. The project is beginning. We are going to be working over the next 2 years at least, further developing the project. So please be in touch with us and our work. So what comes next is some immediate things we'll be doing. We're going to be developing the engagement hub. That engagement hub will be a toolkit of resources helping you to build effective engagement, building on the experiences of researchers and users of research. As Catherine mentioned, we're also going to be gathering insights from experimental research and survey evidence into how people respond to evidence and information, because I think that's really important, given that we know that evidence and facts and information can be contested. And then a date for your diaries, we're going to have our first forum, Migration Research to Policy Forum, and that will be in Brussels on a date to be announced. We're in the process of organising it now. But watch this space, keep in touch, and we will let you know our plans. You can contribute to the engagement hub. So we know that in the room are many people who've got extensive experience through their own work of how to build engagement. So if you've got tips for you'd like to share on how to build better engagement with policymakers, but not just with policymakers, with people who might be interested in your work, your ideas, and your experiences of engagement, then we are very happy to offer the opportunity to share your tips through our engagement hub. As Eleonora mentioned, we will be offering a training. It's a 2-day training. It is free, but places are limited. So it is targeted particularly, I think, at researchers. So researchers in many roles and capacities, in many different kinds of organizations, but people primarily in research functions. And the focus for the training will be on building effective engagement between research, policy, and practice. So thinking about strategies for impactful migration research in the world of policy. That will be a 2-day training. It'll be held here at the EUI in Florence. It is free, although we can't pay for you to get to EUI, I'm afraid, but the training itself will be free. But we have limited space. So if you are interested, the details are on our website, migrationresearchtopolicy.eu, and you will find all the details. So we'd be very happy if you wanted to come along and participate in that. And so finally, just encouraging you to engage with us. We're really happy that you've been here with us this afternoon. What can you do now? Well, you can sign up from the website, migrationresearchtopolicy.eu. You can join our mailing list. You can follow us on LinkedIn. That's a social media channel that we use, where we've got a page for the Migration Research to Policy Collab. So please keep in touch with that for news and updates. And of course, we're a consortium of 12 partners. So our partners will be sharing information, and we will be using the LinkedIn page and also to share information about the project. And of course, you can contribute. You can contribute your insights into communication of research and into engagement through our what we call the MR2P shorts, short, effective communications about research and engagement. So the final message is that we can't collaborate without you. So I think the message of this event is we've heard fantastic insights into how to build engagement. There's some fantastic questions as well, a lot of experience in the room. Engagement requires collaboration. Our project is beginning. We're in the early days. We cannot collaborate without you. If you want to find out more, you can go to our website, migrationresearchtopolicy.eu, and you'll find all the information about the project, the things we've been talking about, our plans and ambitions, and it will develop. So keep in touch. And so as a final thing, thanks everybody for participating. Keep in touch, and you'll be hearing from us as we develop the project. So I wish everyone a very good afternoon, and hope to see you at another event of the Migration Research to Policy Collab in the future. Bye.